Okay, today I'd like to kind of briefly talk about some of the elements of fiction that are important as we're studying fiction, as we're studying these short stories that we are beginning with this week. Um, the list that I'm going to be talking about certainly is not exhaustive. It's not even as long as the list that's in the book, but these are some kind of key elements that I want to take a little bit of time on that I think really do help us to see more in a story than what's kind of just there on the surface. That's not to say that what's on the surface, the story itself, the plot itself, is not important. It's just that it's possibly fruitful to look at some other things here too. I'm going to kind of give you an overview, and then we'll go into each of these sections separately. The first one is point of view. Then we're going to talk about narrative structure, characters and their development, settings, symbols, motifs, and then finally theme. The first area I want to talk about is point of view. And the point of view is the way in which we as an audience experience a story. It's the perspective through which we experience a story. And depending on the kind of point of view, and I'll kind of talk about this as we go through each type of point of view, it tells us how close we should feel to a narrative. It tells us how we should feel about the events in a narrative. The first kind of point of view, first person, is I as the narrator. So it's when we're seeing things through the narrator's own perspective. So in a story where if the voice is I am doing this, I am walking into the room, I am doing whatever, that would be a first person point of view. The thing to kind of keep in mind then is that because we're seeing through the narrator's perspective, we're always limited to the narrator's understanding of what is happening. So for example, if I was to tell you that Julia was looking at me with hateful eyes, I don't know that she really is hateful towards me. I'm just giving you my perspective on it. And as a reader, you'd want to look for a sense of whether or not we should believe this narrator, whether or not this narrator is good at reading people, for example. We always consider a first-person narrator unreliable, the first-person point of view unreliable. And again, the reason for that is that it's always through that person's own perspective. So, you think about your own sense of the world and how reliable you are, really at understanding the things that you see. You're pretty reliable, but we basically see things and experience things only through our own perspective, and our decisions about how we feel about things, our decisions about whether or not people are acting well towards us or not, are often just a result of how we are feeling that day, not necessarily something that's external. A good example of a first-person narrator is perhaps Presumed Innocent, which is a novel that came out probably 15 years ago now, and maybe even a little bit more than that. And in this novel, it's a murder mystery essentially, where we're following the man that's been accused of murder, and and throughout the murder mystery, the reason why it remains a mystery as to whether or not he did it is that he doesn't bother to think about it. And if you think about it, the things that we think about tell a lot about who we are, and often we don't think about certain things. Another common point of view is the third person point of view, and the third person point of view is kind of the he, she, it, they voice. Characters are described by kind of a non-participant usually, so the person who's describing this is not part of the story. The narrator can be described as either limited in third-person point of view, wherein the narrator only follows certain characters. So most movies probably would fall into this. So for example, if you're watching a Die Hard movie, the Bruce Willis character is kind of the hero of the story, and we kind of experience the story as Bruce Willis experiences it. In a Harry Potter novel, for example, we experience the novel as Harry Potter experiences things. Limited narrators tend to allow for things like suspense. I mean, if we're following along with only certain characters, then we don't know exactly what's going on with everybody else. Contrasted to limited narrators then would be a omniscient third-person point of view, and omniscient points of view are essentially godlike or goddess-like. So we are following all characters. We can be in all characters' minds. We can understand the reasons for what all characters are doing at any given time. The final point of view is a second-person point of view. This is the least frequently used. And we already talked about the pronouns I. We talked about the pronouns he, she, it, they. And so second person ultimately covers you as the narrator. And so the audience is ultimately the narrator and the participant. So you can see that why it might not be used all that often. It's kind of off-putting if you're being told that you are doing things in a story. It can be kind of hard to kind of deal with. One example, kind of a fairly famous novel that came out about 20 years ago now, in the 80s, was Bright Lights, Big City, which was made into a movie with Michael J. Fox. And in this novel, it was put in the second-person point of view, and the narrator, you, are essentially this guy that comes into New York City during the decadent 80s and begins to do things like drugs and sleeping around and all these kinds of things. And so, it's pretty off-putting if the book is telling you that you're walking in and doing a line of blow off of a prostitute's ass. That can be kind of off-putting for the reader. And so that's one reason why this is kind of infrequently used, is that the reader is kind of often doing kind of horrible things in a story possibly, and is saying to themselves, no, I'm not. I'm reading this. Reading's good for me. So next I want to talk about kind of the narrative structure of stories. And the typical structure is that we begin with kind of equilibrium. We begin where everything's kind of been going along in a certain way for a while. And again, the narrative structure, the typical structure of a plot is important to note, even though oftentimes plots do not follow this structure, because if a plot doesn't follow this structure, we can start to say things about how it is moving outside of the typical structure, or how it's presenting the typical structure in a bizarre way. Conflict will occur to upset the balance, and so the way that we track this then is we start with stasis. That's where we are before the story. The story usually starts with conflict, kind of the event or events that begin to take shape as a result. Conflict kind of sets us up for what's going to happen in the story. Ultimately, those conflicts, the problems that the story's participants face, reach a point where there's kind of no turning back. It's the highest point of the conflict. This leads ultimately to some falling action, so people start to figure out what it all means. Loose ends are starting to be tied up, and then we kind of set up with a new sense of equilibrium. We set up a sense that the characters have changed, but they're now going to go forward in some way. For characters, we basically